Dear, sweet Viola, Chapter 2, The Helping Hands. The blonde girl entered the house, her eyes adjusting to the dim light inside. The entry hall, much to her surprise, only had one other door in it. She was ready to turn around and head back out, but when she had entered, the door had closed and locked itself. She had only one choice: the door on the wall between the candles. She stepped forward and entered the room. It was a bleak room, devoid of any features. The only things that stood out in the dim light of the room was the far-off walls, a paper on the wall opposite her, and a spot on the floor, the color of deep crimson. For some reason, the blonde girl thought the spot was blood, but that didn't make sense to her. The only time she saw blood in that same pattern was when her father had a messy kill when hunting. There were no animals in the house, unless one considered the sum of the truly unworthy ones. She blinked her eyes for a moment. She was not certain why those thoughts happened, but it had to be because of the house. She was certain, however, that the paper on the wall was important. It would obviously tell her what she would need to do to get past the huge rose bush. She started to step forward, preparing to walk over the spot straight to the note.
The second she stepped on the crimson spot on the floor, she heard a rumbling sound. Before she could move, the far-off walls came towards her. The time it took them to rush towards her was faster than she could even comprehend what was about to happen. In an instant, the pain caused by the two walls pushing on to meet in the center of the room was brief but intense. It had ended when the pressure fractured every bone in her body, squashing all her organs between the walls, staining them and the floor with her blood as her life ended.
The blonde blinked before she put her foot down, stopping before her foot landed on the blood-red spot. The walls closing in hadn't happened, but she had been warned about what would have happened. If she had stepped on the spot, she would have been killed. That would have been bad, since she was one of the worthy ones. She shook her head for a moment, still unsure what had happened, and then sidestepped the spot. She walked over to the paper and looked at it. In an untidy scrawl, she saw a simple message on it. "Come to my room." The message didn't make sense, unless it referred to her purple-haired friend. It almost looked like her friend's writing, except the letters appeared to be written by someone who couldn't even see what they were writing. She turned to leave the room, remembering to sidestep around the bloodstain. She then made her way through the room. For the briefest of moments, if someone else had been in the house, they would have noticed a cruel smile cross the blonde girl's face. It had crossed another face in that house some time ago, when those walls had crushed another person in that room. That look had left the blonde girl's face when she left the room. She had returned to the foyer, causing the same black cat that had been outside to yelp in surprise. She jumped a bit herself, since she hadn't expected the feline to be there. The cat, however, regained its composure first and returned to her. "Meow. Decided to follow you for laughs." She watched as the cat looked behind her for a moment, then said, Incidentally, where the heck do you come from? She turned, almost about to point out the obvious answer to the question, when she saw the door was gone. The room with the crushing walls was gone, as if it never existed. Had she really entered that death trap of a room, and in turn had a vision of her body crushed between the walls? She shook her head, trying to shake the notion. Something told her that the nature of the house was both real and surreal. She decided to head to the door outside, only to find it was locked. Something in her was not surprised, as if it knew what was going on. She then looked to the west, since she remembered the front door was facing south, and entered the next room. The room she entered appeared to have a desk and an empty bookshelf in it. She saw a door on the northern wall, but when she checked it, it was locked. She looked at the door and could not see how to unlock it. She looked over at the table then and saw something she might be able to use. A pair of scissors were on the table. She grabbed them and tried to take them from the table, but to her surprise, they were chained to the table. Why would someone chain a pair of scissors to a desk in a house like this? It made no sense, unless it was meant to tease someone who could not leave and wanted to. The blonde left the scissors and made her way back to the first room, and thought and through it to a door on the east wall. Entering that door led her to a long, narrow hallway. The end she was at had two doors, the one she had entered from and the one across from it. A quick glance down the hall hinted that another door was at the end of the hall. She hesitated for a moment, feeling that something important was down the hall, but then decided to enter the door across from her. The room she entered, however, was very plain. It was almost dull, except for a large cylindrical basket with a bear in it in the center. She quietly looked at it, remembering she had brought one for her friend. She hoped her friend, the purple-haired girl, had enjoyed it. It would bring her some happiness as the unfortunate day drew near. The blonde came out of her thoughts after a moment, having just noticed a note stuck to the wall. She walked over to it and read the simple message on it. Bears in a basket. She looked back at the basket and took note that there was only one in the basket, and probably not enough room for a second bear, unless it was small or were missing its limbs. Again, a wry smile crossed the girl's face, one that looked out of place on the blonde's face, but no one would ever see that smile. She left the room and went down the narrow hallway toward the clock at the far end and found another room. When she entered the room, it wasn't as plain as the previous one. It had a lovely carpet, a display cabinet, a desk, and a pile of gifts in one corner. Her first stop was the display case. It was locked, but something in there called out to her, as if it belonged to her and wanted to be back in her hands. She thought about trying to break the case, but decided against it. She felt it would open at the right time. She then turned her attention to the desk and the open book upon it. It was a diary, and Obviously, the entry had been written by a child. For some reason, there only seemed to be one entry in it. I was sick, so no one wanted to play with me. My father and mother didn't love me. The blonde's heart went out to the young writer. To be sick and have no one, not even their parents, care to do anything to make her feel better. It disgusted her. She even thought that the huge pile of gifts were to make up for the lack of caring. She hoped that the parents got what they deserved. In fact, some of the more horrible things she could think of would be too good for them. Again, a smile that did not look right on the blonde's face appeared there. After a moment her eyes landed on the pile of gifts, and one caught her eye. It was a teddy bear. It was just the right size to almost fit in the basket. She picked it up and went back to the room the basket was in, only to confirm her thoughts. She tried to place the bear she had into the basket, but it was just a bit too big. There was only one way to make the bear fit, and there was only one tool to help her complete the task. The blonde girl dashed out of the room, and then through the foyer, before reaching the desk that had scissors chained to them. She figured they would come in handy, since she felt she wasn't strong enough to rip off the limbs of the bear. She felt that was because of her illness, but then recalled she wasn't sick. Regardless of that thought, she put the bear on the desk and snipped off its limbs. As she cut off the limbs, two odd things happened. The first was that each limb removed seemed to disappear from sight, as if they did not exist in the first place. The second odd thing was something she didn't notice until the last limb was gone. The scissors had gotten very bloody. It was almost as if she had cut off an actual bear's limbs. Of course, that would be cruel. Something the blonde girl would not do. Yet the thought of doing that caused another smile to cross the blonde girl's face. And that smile did not look right. Once the task was done, the blonde left the desk, not overly bothered about the missing limbs and the bloody scissors. Her task was done, and now the bear would fit in the basket. She took the teddy bear's torso and left the room the way she had entered. As she did so, a bloody paw print appeared on the wall. For a moment, the blonde shuddered, but then she moved on. The strangeness continued as she passed through the entry hall, and the candles on the wall blew out. The sensation did not seem to bother the cat, so the blonde tried to not let it bother her. She remained calm all the way into the room with the basket in it. The note was still on the wall, and the blonde girl just walked up to the basket. She shoved the limbless bear into the basket, and as she did so, an audible click was heard. Feeling the task was done, the blonde girl walked back to the note. When she looked at it this time, it was blank. She looked at the other side of the paper, momentarily expecting that the paper had somehow been flipped over, but it was blank as well. While a normal person would have been unnerved by this turn of events, she just accepted the odd event and headed for the exit of the room. The strangeness continued just as she was about to leave. She noticed out of the corner of her eye that a bloody paw print appeared on the wall near the door. She chanced to glance back and noticed that the basket of bears had moved as well, like it was coming after her. She quickly left the room and returned to the foyer. As the blonde started to cross the room, she could have sworn that each step she took caused vibrations in the floor. She was a quarter of the way through the room when two vases of roses fell to the floor and shattered. This made the blonde girl worry even more. Was there some huge creature in the house, or coming towards the house? She took one more tentative step and received her answer.
The giant teddy bear burst through the door the blonde was heading towards. The only way the massive thing could move was to bounce. It was so big, nothing could get around it. The sheer size of the teddy bear only kept the blonde girl rooted to the spot before it landed on top of her. Instantly, everything went dark, and the blonde found the bear to be heavier than a human body could endure for too long. Then it bounced up and down a few more times. The second time was the one that made all sensations stop, as a pour of blood started to coat the floor.
Again, the vision ended as soon as it began, and the blonde girl turned and ran back to the room the basket was in. She momentarily glanced back as she headed through the first door, seeing the huge teddy bear bounce through the room towards her. She did not want to end up under it. Once she was through the door, the sound the huge bouncing teddy bear made was gone. She waited for a moment before turning around and re-entering the foyer. The bear was gone, and the vases were back in place. The black cat was even sitting there again. The blonde girl didn't remember seeing the cat there when the bear attacked. Still, she did not want to risk the possibility of the gigantic teddy bear returning. So she quickly ran through the foyer and into the next room. Once there, the blonde girl remembered the locked door in the back of the room. She started to head for that door, but paused when she heard a sound behind her. She quickly turned around, and to her amazement, the limbs from the teddy bear were on the floor. She bent down to pick up the limbs, not even fazed by the blood on the end of the limbs. She then moved on through the now unlocked door. The room she entered was an elaborate dining room. There were 8 chairs around a magnificent dining table, set up for an elaborate meal. Ironically, there was already a bowl of some sort of soup set up. As she approached it, she noticed a note on the table. At the head of the table, on it were 2 words: taste poison. She then caught a whiff of it, and it smelled odd. It even looked odd, green in color. For all she knew, the soup was pea soup. For a brief moment, the blonde girl heard her stomach growl.
The second her stomach stopped growling, the blonde girl picked up the bowl and drank down the soup. The second it was gone, she heard a click come from another door. She headed in the direction of the sound, and as she walked, she felt odd. Her legs felt weak as she moved towards the door the sound had come from. Just as she got closer to the door, her limbs gave out and her vision quit. Everything went black, and before her body hit the floor, she was dead.
She blinked, and before she touched the bowl, she pulled her hand away. She walked away from the table, but was certain the bowl was important, but the contents were deadly. For a brief moment, she recalled another person having the soup, back when many kids had entered. One child had sipped the soup and ended up on the floor, foaming at the mouth. Again, the blonde girl had a smile that looked wrong on her face, one that no one saw. She then headed to the other side of the room. She glanced in each of the corners, and she saw a door in the corner that shared a wall with the corner of the room she had entered from. On the wall opposite this new door, she saw another door. Recalling the vision, she remembered that the sound of something unlocking came from there. She was certain that was the way she needed to go, but she would have to check the other door. The blonde girl went over to the first door she had seen and went through it. To her surprise, it led to the foyer. It also surprised the black cat she had seen earlier. The cat jumped and momentarily arched its back before it resumed a normal stance. "Jeez, you freaked me out. Don't scare me like that again." Now, a slight smile crossed the blonde's face. It was the smile that marked the childlike innocence the girl should have had. Any child, usually, has a slight smile or giggle when a cat gets scared. This sly smile, however, had with it a little bit of vindictiveness. She returned to the dining room and went to the opposite door. A note on the wall next to the door confirmed a thought she had. The note read, "The cook is busy. Lend a hand." The thought had been that the door was to the kitchen. No doubt there was a way to solve the problem with the poisoned soup in the room. The words mentioning a cook, however, made the blonde think there was someone else in the house. She didn't remember seeing a cook on her past visits there. She cautiously entered the room. As she did, she heard the sounds of someone chopping something. From the door, she could see the counter, a cutting board on top of it, and a knife constantly moving up and down on the board. No one was visibly holding it, but someone was there. The blonde girl felt leery about approaching the invisible being, so she decided it would be best to approach them last. Her first stop was to a book that was lying on a small table. Inside the book, she found a page already marked, detailing the use of true silverware. She read how silver was used in old times because it was a good detector of poison. Silver would turn black in the presence of poison. She had no doubt, especially after her last vision, that she needed to expose the fact that the soup was poison. She then tried to look around the kitchen more, only to find no silverware. The only thing of interest in the kitchen was another door. The door, which she had figured would be in the room, was locked. She lowered her head and knew what she would have to do. She walked over to the invisible chef. The whole time she had been in the room, she never heard the figure speak. As she approached them, a voice seemed to be coming from the area of the knife. The voice didn't sound ethereal, but she still wasn't sure as it said, I'm busy, so busy. The blonde girl deep down felt compelled to help the invisible chef.
The blonde girl felt herself offering a hand, and she heard the invisible chef speak once again. A hand is what I needed. That quick, she felt her hand grabbed and placed over the counter. She tried to pull it away, but the grip of the invisible chef was too strong. She then felt the true strength as the knife came down on her wrist, cutting her hand clean off. Instantly, blood was gushing out from her arteries. The panic the moment caused made her heart beat faster, pumping more blood. It wasn't long before the loss of blood caused everything to go black, and death consumed her.
The blonde girl blinked again, and she was standing next to the chef. She had not offered to lend a hand, at least not yet. She knew better, having enjoyed the sight of one of the dumber ones having done so before. She then shook her head, unsure why she thought that. Instead of dwelling on that odd thought, she offered up the limbs from the teddy bear. Thankfully, she watched the invisible figure take the limbs and chop off the hands. While she couldn't be sure, the figure addressed the blonde girl. Oh, thank you. I was in need of a hand or two. She then noticed something apparently floating in the air. She held out her hand and felt the object being gently placed in her hand. Let me show my appreciation. She looked at the object now in her hand, and the blonde girl smiled. It was a silver key. She immediately ran to the door and tried to unlock it. Unfortunately, the key did not fit. She looked at the key again, wondering what she had to do with it. The fact that the silver key wouldn't fit in the door seemed to mock her. At that moment, she remembered the words of the book and the soup. While it wasn't a piece of silverware, it was silver. It would reveal that the soup is poisonous. She quickly left the kitchen and ran over to the dining room table. She approached the soup-filled trireme. Again, she was tempted to try the soup, but the blonde girl resisted. Instead of trying the soup, she placed the silver key into the soup. She watched the soup. After a few moments, the submerged key turned black. That very second, she heard the click of a door unlocking. The blonde girl knew that the door was now open. She quickly ran into the kitchen and over to the formerly locked door. The door now opened, and on the other side was a set of stairs leading up to the next floor. The blonde girl started heading up the stairs. As she did, for a brief moment, she saw a girl with purple hair. She had seen the figure before, and part of her was certain she knew the girl. For a moment, she felt a bit of contempt for the figure, but she also felt that the figure was part of the reason she was at the house in the first place. A visit to a sick friend. She quickly rushed after them. As the blonde girl did so, the purple-haired girl felt that her plan was working. The house would help her make things right. The house was alive, and it was loyal to the purple-haired girl. For a brief moment, however, the purple-haired girl wondered if it was a fact or if the house was loyal only to its true master.